Good morning, good afternoon to the folks that are already with us. I'm going to wait just a moment longer before we get started since we are a little bit before noon. All right. Well, it is officially 12 o'clock, so I am going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. My name is Jillian Saul. I am staff for the APA Virginia chapter. Our chapter is happy to host the Mid-Atlantic Planning Collaboration webinar series, which you may have noticed this year we have shifted to a recurring every second Thursday schedule. So hopefully that helps you keep track of our series a little bit better. I will save some of the introductions for today's webinar for Andrew, our immediate past president of the Virginia chapter, but I just wanted to run through a couple of quick housekeeping items. So today we're presenting Data Centers, Two Towns, Two Approaches. So Andrew will introduce our speakers. We have some representation from Culpeper and from Apex, North Carolina. The CM information is listed on this page, but I will also be sharing that in the chat in just a moment. Let me move forward. Here we go. All right, so we really do encourage questions. Please submit your questions through the Q&A box. That will just help Andrew keep track of all inquiries. We're also going to keep the chat box open if there's ever an opportunity for any open-ended discussion. But again, for any questions, we really encourage you to put those in the Q&A. That will just help us administratively. And once we do get to that formal Q&A period at the end, feel free to use the raise hand feature if you'd prefer to ask your question out loud. Once you do that, I could take you off of mute from there. You may have been notified on your screens a moment ago that this webinar is being recorded. It will be shared to the MAPC YouTube channel by the end of the week, hopefully, which I guess is tomorrow. And I will share the link to that channel on YouTube in the chat box as well in just a moment. This webinar, or all attendees will receive the slide decks along with that link in the days to come. Quick plug for our conference, just as I hand over things to our speakers. I will just quickly note that our APA Virginia conference is rolling around the corner. It is starts on July 26th in Danville, Virginia, and today is the last day to get your tickets at the early bird rate. So secure those discounted rates today. Alrighty, I will hand it over to Andrew. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, Jillian, and thanks everyone for joining us. We had entitled this Two Towns, Two Approaches. It's really more Two Communities, Two Approaches as we've expanded the Culpeper experience here. But I've got a great group of speakers with me here today. From Apex, North Carolina, we got Bruce Venable, who's part of the planning staff there. From the town of Culpeper, we've got Paige Reed, who heads up economic development and tourism. And from Culpeper County, we've got Brian Rothmel, who's in charge of Culpeper County's economic development. And so they are going to bring their breadth of experiences and share the activities and experiences that these two communities have taken as it relates to data centers. They differ, but what the common theme that you'll hear is that every community really needs to examine what is right for the right approach for their community, and wanting to just share sort of two different approaches that have been taken by communities, and hopefully have some time for some quality question and answer at the end of the session. So to kick us off, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce, who's going to share with us Apex's story and the path that they have taken to date as it relates to data centers. So Bruce, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Bruce Venable with the Town of Apex's Planning Department here. Just going to kind of give you the overview of kind of what we've experienced in the last year when it comes to data centers and how we're approaching the situation. So go ahead and get started. So, for those who aren't aware, just Apex as a glance, we're located to the southwest of Raleigh, North Carolina, as you can see on the little map there. We're a population of plus 70,000. We have a median household income of about 144,000. We are a water and power provider to our town itself. Our peak electrical demand is about 125 megawatts. We have water treatment capacity of about 13 million gallons per day. Our average daily flow is about 5 million gallons per day, which is about 40% of our overall capacity. And we have water allocation from Jordan Lake, which is our primary freshwater reservoir of about 10 million and a half million gallons per day. So just to kind of walk you through our timeline, what we're going to go over and what we've been doing and what we're going to continue to be doing. This started back in September of 25 when we received applications for the request of a rezoning, a UDO amendment and annexation into a town to permit data centers in our jurisdiction. So from then it went on, we had a review period from September 2025 to January 2026, where staff eventually did research and reviews and coordinating, trying to find best practices and policies while reviewing these applications. In January of 2026, we produced a white paper and presented on that information to our town council and planning board in a joint work session. In March of 26, citing concerns about the length of the process, the applicant withdrew all of their applications. And immediately after, in April 26, our town council initiated a 12-month moratorium and directed our environmental advisory board to research data centers and to report back to them with recommendations. So that's kind of the process we'll walk you through now, kind of how we got to where we are and what we're doing going forward. So originally, when the proposal came in, it was for about approximately 200 acres. With 4 buildings. This is just a concept plan. No actual site plan was submitted with this. It was just the rezoning itself. So, but they were suggesting there would be about 4 buildings at 100 square thousand plus with a substation on the site itself. They estimated that their energy usage would be about 300 megawatts. So that's over twice what our whole town uses at peak energy. Their estimated water use would be 1 to 1.5 million gallons per day, depending on the end user's decision to how they want to cool their equipment. We didn't know who the end user would be at this time, so that also complicated some of our understanding. It was a unique situation. The site is located in close proximity to a water reclamation facility, which could open up possibilities for using reclaimed water in the future for a developer that did come here. So this doesn't have to extend water lines too far. And then they're also very close to the Sharon Harris nuclear power plant nearby. So there are high voltage wirings and things like that that they could connect to. And it's a good location as far as the proximity to that. So that's part of the development. So this application comes in and we're like, what do we do now? This is the first data center, really hyperscale data center proposal that we've ever received in the town. We didn't have any clear UDO standards that even kind of fit what we were talking about as far as size and demands and resources that are required. It was part of a rezoning and annexation, so it was outside the town. So we had to go through the rezoning process. In Apex, we utilize conditional zoning a lot. So there's always proffers and additional items that come apart as part of that process. So we really were trying to figure out, well, what needs to be part of this UDO amendment that we have to work with the applicant to draft, and what's more appropriate as a conditional zoning condition of approval for this specific site moving forward. We had very limited local experience. Not a lot of us had experienced quite such a development or anything like that before. And there were significant unknowns and technical questions. I didn't really know anything about data centers until September of 2025 when I started having to research this as part of it coming into our town and being part of one of my projects. So we reached out to a lot of places and we leaned on a lot of people to try and figure out the best we could in that time frame. And then we needed to really have informed policies to make sure that we had the appropriate development in our community. And I think that's probably something you hear repeatedly. It's not just that we're pro or against data centers in general. It's more so we're trying to fit what's best for our communities in whatever regards, whatever type of industry that we're looking at. And so that's where we kind of set off from there. So we started looking at trying to figure out what were the key things we needed to evaluate. We understood that they were heavy energy consumers. We understood that there's a potential for heavy water consumption if they utilize any type of liquid cooling. So we were concerned about, we have a lot of property in that area that's still relying on well and groundwater and things like that. So we had to start exploring other options because we didn't think that was feasible. What were the environmental impacts of data centers? And we know that there's a lot of generators on site. We know that there's potentially fuel on site and other things. And how is that going to impact the neighbors around us? There's noise. We understand from speaking to our neighbors in Virginia that there's situations, instances where data centers were unfortunately built too close to residential uses or other sensitive receptors. And because of that, there became a serious issue with the noise itself. And so how do we help mitigate those issues? Land use, we wanted to make sure that we were going to make sure these were located in appropriate areas and that the zoning was correct and that it made sense with not only what was best for this project, but what was best for our community and our comprehensive plan as we have it established and adopted today. Obviously, there's no denying that data centers have an enormous economic impact, especially ones of this size. So we had to balance that with all the other things going forward. And that's something that we always have to keep in mind. It's easy to get overwhelmed by all of the other topics and not be able to remember that there is an economic impact that can greatly benefit your town. I'm sure many of you were involved in the recent budget process in your locations and understand that sometimes years are leaner and sometimes they're a bit fatter, and sometimes you really need that economic development in your area. So it's one thing to keep in mind if you're in a jurisdiction that's looking for more economic development. We looked at traffic generation. Luckily, data centers don't generate a lot of traffic once the construction's done. And then we wanted to utilize and understand what the public health and safety aspects would be. So, we'll go through some of this briefly in some of the slides, but, depending on the type of development and setup of the data center, there might be additional public safety concerns that might be appropriate for your community to consider and how you're going to address that. Additionally, in North Carolina, we do have some legislative challenges. In December of 24, our legislator passed a bill that put limits on local government's ability to change zoning regulations that result in a down zoning. For us, a down zoning is any of the following. You decrease development density below what was previously allowed. You reduce permitted uses to fewer than was previously allowed. You create nonconformities on non-residential property, which include uses, lots, structures, improvements, site elements. And proposed rezoning changes that are considered down zonings require property owners' written consent, meaning we really had to get this right. We really had to go into it focused and try and get as close to perfect as we could because we knew there would be limited opportunities to change this once anything was adopted. So setting out to look at the land uses, we began trying to just understand what goes into a data center. What does it look like? What can we expect? So we had to understand that there were going to be large areas, large server rooms. These are going to be like almost warehouse-sized buildings. We had to know that there would be large amounts of air conditioning units. There would be coolers, heat exchangers. There would be backup generators on site, and that there are all these different elements that we need to make sure that we were accounting for. And as far as our land use goes, as far as zoning, buffering, screening, building height, building design, and things like that to make sure it was appropriate for our community. This is just a GIS image of our map. Just the blue area is the site where the data center was looking to go. It's not far from the water reclamation center. You can kind of see to the top right corner there. But adjacently across the street from Old US Highway 1, where it says yellow and it says Gracewood, that's a residential development of about 500 homes. And so looking at that, we tried to be extra conscientious and listen to the neighboring property owners who had concerns about where the placement of these buildings would be, what kind of protections they might have, and how through a land use zoning ordinance we could work to try and protect them. Now, and this is an image from our comprehensive plan, our land use map, and just kind of illustrates that, there's always challenges when you're doing your best to come up with your comprehensive plans and map out what's the best use in the areas that you're looking at. And this area is designated for us as industrial employment. So it's not that we didn't consider industrial employment shouldn't go here. It's just that at what scale and what intensity is appropriate, and how can we still make when we do have all the area across from that highway there, which is still predominantly residential. So we talked there infrastructure impacts for sure. We were concerned about the high electrical load requirements. Again, we talked about was 300 megawatts in this case. In North Carolina, specifically in our jurisdiction, we are a power provider. So that means we buy energy from Duke Energy and we distribute that on behalf of the town. And we wanted to know, could we provide power? It's potentially for the situation. What would that look like if we were the power provider? What protections, what kind of agreements and things like that do we need to be aware of to make sure that we're protecting our community and our ratepayers and things like that? If we're not the power provider and it is Duke, we need to make sure that we understand the process. We understand that we can communicate that to the residents nearby, how this potentially might impact them, whether there'll be positive impacts or negative impacts. We need to be able to understand that and be able to coordinate and explain that. Again, there's coordination with utility partners on grid capacity and upgrades. One thing that's important that was brought to my attention working with our electric department director here was that, we purchase power, so it goes in part of a spreadsheet for power that needs to be provided by Duke Energy and things like that. But sometimes if we're not communicating clearly, power can be kind of double counted some places. And when it's double counted, then we have it kind of throws everything off, and we're maybe generating too much, and so costs or raises and things like that happen. So we really have to be working with our partners to make sure that we're communicating clearly on what's coming in, and that we're not double counting things, and that we have quality expectations of how to serve and provide power without any disruptions. There's a potential for intensive water cooling, as we talked about. A lot of data centers will either implement air cooling, liquid cooling, or some type of hybrid system like adiabatic cooling. So depending on that, the water usage will go up or down depending on what they're utilizing. For a lot of communities, that's a big issue. We'll talk about that more, what that looked like for Apex in just a second. And then there's implications for your long range infrastructure planning. You know, a lot of our CIPs and things like that are going to be implemented off of what we understand as the future growth and where that's going to happen. This is happening so rapidly and so quickly sometimes that it's really kind of making us have to reconsider, like, if we do allow these type of developments in our community, what protections do we have to make sure that we're not stuck with potentially all this new infrastructure that we've accepted and now have to maintain, and what that does to our water supply and our storage and things like that. Again, since we buy power from Duke, I just had this little image on there that as Duke moves towards becoming more environmentally friendly with renewables and other other resources for energy, that we get 53% of our energy is clean energy right now. We want to be conscientious of sustainability of data centers as well. You know, if there's more data centers being developed and more power has to be generated, we just want to be mindful and have a good understanding of where that power is going to come from, whether that be coal, gas. In our case, like half of it is nuclear energy. So that's just something we also kept in track of. Our goal is to keep costs down. So this is a graph from our most recent budget that was recently passed, just kind of highlighting where we are for residential monthly electric bills. So Apex is actually two of the colors on here. We're the green and the yellow. Previously, we were really low compared to some neighboring communities, but then the proposed budget had to raise that a little bit in order to help meet the cost and demands of infrastructure and generation and things like that as well. So our goal is to try to figure out a way to protect the residents as much as possible if we were to ever be the developer or the power provider for a data center at this scale. We were concerned about environmental impacts for water quality and quantity. So obviously the direct impacts, if they're using large amounts of water for cooling, that can have impacts on nearby reservoirs and shared water availability for surrounding communities. You can put stress on your wildlife, you can degrade your habitat, and all sorts of things. There can be indirect impacts from this as well, because power generation facilities require large amounts of water to cool and operate these as well. So we may think like, oh, we have enough water, or they're not going to use liquid cooling in our area, we don't have to worry about that. But we do have to realize that sometimes we're passing that burden on to another community in instances where another community's water is now being used to generate the energy that's going towards this data center. So it's just something from a holistic perspective that we wanted to be aware of and wanted to talk about and have an idea of what was happening. This little table here is interesting. So the Jordan Lake is our water reservoir where we get our drinking water from. The numbers are allocation, a percentage of the total water supply. So we are part of the Cary, Morrisville, and Apex allocation of the first table, the first top of the table there. And that represents 46% or 46 million gallons of water per day that's allocated to us. And then we have the neighboring jurisdictions that have their own allocations as well. And what was important for us is that of this allocation, 91% is already accounted for, meaning that there's only 8.8 million gallons remaining to be distributed and allocated to different communities. And so that really made us like, okay, we understand that there's a limit on the amount of water potentially as far as allocation goes and future development. Where do we want to see this development go? What does that look like for us? So with the help of our water resources team, we kind of put together a little table looking at what could we expect as far as an equivalency goes if we were to have, say, a data center that used 1.5 million gallons of water per day. What would that look like if we invested that water somewhere else? So for us, it was approximately 6,000 more multifamily residential apartments, or 5,000 more single family homes, 5,000 hospital beds, or approximately 43 new high schools in the area, comparable to one we just had built. We looked at some neighboring bioscience facilities, and they varied by size and things like that as well. So, but we just took the median of that, and we could get approximately 22 of those facilities in our area, which is also, an opportunity for good jobs and other things like that. So we just wanted to have the conversation and really have an understanding of what we're investing in if we were just allow these uses as part of our development. There's also water quality aspects of it too. This table here represents some of the treatment and concerns that you would have to address and be aware of. So obviously there's things like there'll be salt, biocides and fungicides, the corrosion inhibitors, and there'll be some metal elements in there as well. All these things can contribute to toxicity and affect the effluent itself. And these are things that will probably require pre-treatment. And so that's just something to also be aware of, that, depending on what your jurisdiction allows, on whether you allow that you require them to connect to municipal sewer. And so that way you're aware of the treatment, that they're doing the pre-treatment that's required, they're receiving the proper permits, and that you may want to avoid allowing them just to dump into a nearby body of water or things like that, because the water quality can be affected, and also the pH, and sometimes the temperature can be higher than is anticipated and can cause detrimental impacts to the local wildlife. So for us, noise was a big issue. It came up a lot in a lot of our conversations. And so a lot of the noise is generated from the HVAC systems, the blowers and things like that, and then also the diesel generators for backup when they are running. We're just going to go through some of the things that generate the most noise on site for people who may not be unaware. We won't spend too much time talking about this, but one important thing we have learned, especially from our neighbors in Virginia and other places that have had to deal with this for a while, is that there's different types of noise. There's the high frequency noise, the dBA, which we're used to all measuring as part of most of our noise ordinances. That is really kind of in the spectrum of human hearing. And we're used to measuring for that at property lines and things like that. What we've learned recently with data centers, or just really any industrial that has a lot of these blowers, generators, and other things like that, is that they also create this low frequency noise, which is a lot of times maybe not perceivable to the human ear, but can even be sometimes felt by the nervous system itself. And this can travel a great distance. And so it's also important, and we became aware of this, that we also need to be looking and perhaps measuring for DBC, or using a unweighted scale like DBZ, in order to really make sure that we're understanding the types of noise and frequencies that are escaping the property, and making sure the neighboring property owners aren't too poorly affected by that. So we'll be looking at that. This is something that's interesting because, we had a noise ordinance that worked for us for a while. But because of this, we're having real serious conversations about maybe needing to update our noise ordinance in different ways to address these types of new uses, these kind of things that are a little disruptive, and like, how do we deal with them? So it's been interesting to get to work on that as well, and just something to be mindful of. So we'll just go through this real quickly. I'm not going to read all this, but these are just like air cooled chillers. They make noise, usually exterior, large operation of fans. There's a cooling tower. So if you're driving by, if you're not, like, we don't have a lot of data centers in our area, so we don't see too many of these in like large scale, but these are kind of things that might be on site. These are backup generators. They're designed to operate continuously by burning some type of fuel or energy. They're typically only supposed to be used or tested really for maintenance during the months. They're not being used for emergency situations. But again, there's a lot of concern about diesel backup generators from an environmental standpoint due to emissions and things like that, as well as noise. So our community was really proactive about talking about emissions testing and having acoustic buffers and different things like these situated around them. And we'll continue to look into that as we move forward. More example of an air handling unit can really produce those low frequency hums that kind of generate and go far away. We're also concerned, we talked about this a little bit already, is hazards on the site. Again, given the proximity to across the street for that residential development, neighbors were really concerned about like what possible contaminants or hazards might be on site that they might have to potentially deal with in the case of a failure of some type of equipment. So chemical hazards were one that came up. They'll have large amounts of coolant, refrigerant in some cases, and biocides and fungicides for water treatment. There's also diesel oil if they're using diesel generators and stuff on site. Fire and explosion hazards exist. The volume and fuel stored will depend on the redundancy and energy demands and other uses or microgrid setups of your data center or development that's coming in. But in our instance, the hyperscale data center was proposing about 96 diesel generators. And so that could be 500,000 gallons or more of diesel fuel on site just for those, because they told us each generator may carry 6,000 gallons each. And then there might be a small reservoir to refill those if they are needed to be used. And so that's just something also to be aware of that we're considering. In conversations with people, given that there's concerns about diesel generators, air pollutants, uses of water, and things like that, some communities and some developers have mentioned that they're moving towards more battery energy storage system for backups and things like that. Some hazards come along with those as well. So for these battery energy storage systems, if you're not familiar, they're kind of like small, elongated buildings or storage containers that are full of cabinets that have lots of different types of batteries, whether it be lithium ion, lead acid, sodium ion, and there that store energy, that pull energy off the grid and store it and then use it later on when there's maybe a disruption of energy or an outage or things like that. So these can consistently hold 200 to maybe 1,000 batteries, depending on the size of the container itself. But because of this, there are hazards associated with it, especially with lithium ion batteries, which you guys are maybe aware of as well, and also dealing with cars. So special training and equipment is necessary to sometimes treat these types of fires should there be some type of outbreak. So back then, our community response then, I have it broken down into then and now because I think we've made some progress and I want to share that with you. So our community response then, in October of 25, our project presents to our town's environmental advisory board. Our town's environmental advisory board is just an advisory board that is focused on more environmental policies and adopted guidance for the town. Our rezonings of a certain size will come before the board. They'll discuss potential environmental issues on the site, and they'll discuss how best to mitigate these issues through a series of potential zoning conditions that the applicant will offer as part of their conditional zoning. News got out that there might be a potential data center coming and that they were scheduled to go to this meeting itself. So the meeting takes place, the developer goes. Unfortunately, on many fronts, the developer wasn't quite prepared for this meeting as well as they probably should have been. And in addition, there was some confusion over the process, which kind of led to distrust and mobilized the community to action. They thought this was the final be-all approval process for this project. And we didn't do a good enough job communicating that this was just one of many steps in the process. This was just to communicate on like potential environmental issues, whether like there's streams and buffers or whether there's woodland that needs to be protected and things like that to make sure that we're trying to achieve the environmental goals that we have. And so since there was confusion, the community started to become active and started to come to meetings and let their voices be known. So from October 25 to March 26, we had 10 to 40 members. There's probably more on different times and different meetings that showed up. They wear the same shirt, they were all in the same color, and they were all pretty unified. And multiple of them would get up every public forum session to speak on data centers and why they don't belong in Apex and what issues they were concerned about. And these related to environmental issues, resources, zoning, public health, and more. So talking about moratoriums, this is just a nice little map I was able to find. I want to share with you. So 19 out of 50 states are currently restricting or are considering restrictions on data centers at some level. We're in blue there in North Carolina. So for North Carolina, there's about 11 active bans or current moratoriums or things like that in the process, and other communities are currently considering them as well. Now, this varies from county to county and jurisdiction to jurisdiction as well. You'll hear about a data center being approved a few months ago, and then you'll hear about one considering a 6-month or 12-month moratorium as well. So in March 26, the applicant withdraws their application for the rezoning and UDO amendments and annexation. And in April 26, the town council initiates a 12-month moratorium. And that moratorium process would lay out that we would like a 12-month period to be able to research and better understand data centers and data center type uses and be able to formulate the best proper uses and standards for this type of use to move forward. With that, our town council directed their environmental advisory board to spend the next 12 months researching data centers and to provide a list of recommendations for UDO amendments and other regulations by the end of the 12-month period. The board is a 4-member subcommittee, and once each month they will meet together to receive presentations from subject matter experts on key issues related to data centers and their impacts, water, energy, land use, and safety. We've been doing this for a few months now. We started in April. We've done land use, we've done water, we've done electric. We'll be doing economic impact upcoming in this next month, and we'll continue going through this process. We have this separated into 3 phases. So we're gathering community input, researching potential impacts, and doing topic-specific presentations, as I mentioned. And for the first 8 months, and then from month 9 to 10, what we're going to do is we're going to draft amendments and recommendations to mitigate some of these impacts. We're going to present the findings and recommendations to the board itself as a whole, where they'll vote on the recommendations. And then finally, in the final months, we'll finalize those, and then we'll present these recommendations to our town council for them to act on or recommend changes or send it back to us. And we'll continue this process until we've come up with some type of resolution. In order to provide more transparency, because again, we were disappointed with how the news got out before, and we wanted to make sure that people understood that we weren't rubber stamping anything, that we understood their concerns, and we wanted to make sure that the community had a voice. And so part of this data center subcommittee, we've set up a website. Part of this website is mirrored on some I've seen in Virginia, which I thought were very helpful, and I appreciate our Virginia friends who are here today because they've inspired me in a lot of ways. We have our scheduled meetings. We have the documents and materials that are shared at each meeting, the presentations, the minutes as well. What's also nice is that in order to keep the community engaged and active, we're also doing bi-monthly calls via Teams where I will set out a Teams link to the people who have signed up to receive information about our data center subcommittee. And they'll receive a link and we'll join. And we'll spend an hour at lunchtime essentially talking about the concerns, whether it was about that month's topic or whether there's something that's come up new that they would like to talk about. And then I will take that information, distill it into some type of form of minutes or report, and I give it to the subcommittee for them to consider moving forward. So community response now. We had that little hiccup before, but now things are moving in the right direction. Once the data center project was withdrawn, they supported the 12-month moratorium proposed by the town council. They're participating and providing feedback to staff and to the town's environmental advisory board. And the most important thing is their input is directly shaping the type of research and considerations that the town should be aware of and try to mitigate. We're fortunate enough to have citizenry that are educated and passionate and they care. And they brought up some really great things to our attention. We're really leaning on some of the resources of their expertise to really guide us and to point us in the right directions for things that maybe we just didn't consider about it. When I'm a planner, I realize that there's sometimes I don't always get along with engineers, but engineers provide a fantastic perspective and they help me understand things. The same with our economic development. I may not always be thinking about the dollars, but they're thinking about things in a different way. And so these citizens have also done that for us. So they've given us a great path to kind of explore, fill out thoughts, and be able to move forward with something that represents the community as a whole. So lessons learned from us: engage with your community members often and early, provide transparency and opportunities for them to participate in the process, which we learned in doing now. Engage with all your departments and agencies from the outset. When we first got the data center application, we didn't realize how complex it was and that we really had to pull in our water resources, our electric departments, our public works, and really had to really get everyone on board to understand how big of a project it is and what kind of impacts it would have. I highly recommend that if you're someone who doesn't have data centers in your community now, and you think that might be something you want or something you might anticipate is going to come your way, start those conversations now, start them early, and be prepared to have those conversations. Utilize your regional resources. For us, we leaned on heavily the Lake County Planning Department, the Central Pines Regional Council, and their employees, and then the expertise and understanding from departments like the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. I'm happy to get to work with these organizations. I get to participate with the Central Pines. We're working on drafting a model ordinance for our particular region and the jurisdictions that are a part of that. It won't, as with anything, it won't be a one-size-fits-all ordinance. There are going to be things that fit one community that don't fit another, and that's okay, and that's perfect. The only thing we're trying to do is provide the opportunity to really give people the ability to kind of consider all the possible things that could affect their community and how to address that via UDO amendments or other types of regulation. So what's next for us? We're going to continue with our educational presentations and work with our board until we are able to give them their recommendations in April 27. We'll continue to work with our regional partners, as I mentioned, and we're going to have to continue to monitor changes at the federal and state level. For us specifically, there's a Senate bill right now, Senate Bill 730, the Ratepayer Protection Act, which defines definitions for data centers, which requires particular types of cooling systems for data centers and classifies them, based on the energy uses and different things like that. So that's something that it were to pass or go into effect, we would have to be aware of and make sure that whatever we come up with in this next 12-month period is in alignment with that. There's also the Governor's Energy Task Force policy that is working on updates and recommendations on how North Carolina can move into the future, meeting the need for development and new technology and industry, while also making sure that we have a reliable and predictable grid that will serve everyone in North Carolina appropriately. So there's a lot of things going on. They're providing recommendations and they're continuing their research as well. And so we'll draw upon that and try to align with that best we can to make sure that Apex is in a great position moving forward. But yeah, that's kind of what's happening in Apex. Thank you for listening. And I will pass this all off to Andrew or Paige.
Thanks, Bruce. Greatly appreciated. If you don't mind, we got a couple of questions that are sort of specific to the Apex example in the Q&A box that I'd ask if you can potentially look to give some responses as we let Brian and Paige talk about the Culpeper experience. And I think, Brian, you're the one who's going to be leading us off, I believe, talking about Culpeper and what this community has done as it relates to data centers. Or Paige, is it potentially going to be you?
Brian and I together.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
thanks, Andrew.
I know you
Thanks.
guys. Oh, I was going to say, I know you guys started with two towns, but you can't really talk about the town of Culpeper without looking at the bigger picture of the Culpeper Technology Zone, which is why it works really well for us to share together.
Yeah, so we appreciate the time. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Bruce, for that. From Apex, when I first got into economic development, I spent a lot of time learning about Chatham County because it felt like a very similar community to the community I previously was in Virginia. So spent some time researching your neck of the woods. But um, thank you all. I'm Brian. I'm with the County of Culpeper. Our technology zone, where we're having data centers, borders the line that is imaginary with your eyes, but very real on a map between the town and the county. So Paige and I work these projects together, and sometimes they go on one side of the line or the other, and they go through a different planning process. When we talk about the Culpeper Tech Zone, I always like to start off with because everyone always tries to jump to the end. You know, what does it look like right now? And then we can kind of work our way backwards of how we got there. We currently have two existing campuses in the tech zone. We have Swift, which you may or may not know of. You actually do know of, but you may or not be aware of. They do financial transactions. It's the way banks communicate with each other. They have three data centers. They have one in Europe, one in Asia, I believe it's in Singapore, and then they have one in Culpeper, Virginia. You would naturally put these three areas together in a bucket, and that's how we got to that Swift data center. But the reason why we have Swift is we previously had a Federal Reserve building that was kind of a Cold War protection era that is now the Library of Congress. So everything you hear or see is stored in that facility. But when it was the Federal Reserve, Swift wanted to be near it. And then Equinix came because we had great fiber connectivity. And Equinix came in 2008. That is when we created our ordinance, which incentivized for data centers. So we've been trying to go after data centers since 2008, and we were successful in one parcel. And then we didn't see much activity until we got towards 2021, 2022. And that's when we had seven newly announced campuses, four of which are the developers are controlling all seven of those. So we have Cloud HQ, DataBank, EdgeCore, and then Stack Infrastructure. And Stack is the one that owns multiple campuses. They own about half of the tech zone with the names that we use internally. But the two that are most important for the town are the Culpeper Tech Campus and then Copper Ridge. Everything else will be on the county side of the line. And it's more than just that we're next to each other. There's a lot of overlap. For example, the town is the water provider. They operate the water system that services this area of the community. Also, just a few quick facts. It's about 10 million square feet. You'll see it gets up to 12 million square feet. I don't try to harp on that so much because that is the maximum build. Data centers are not worried about square feet like you and I are. They're more worried about the power, which comes to 2.1 gigawatts. It's going to be seven new 300 megawatt substations that'll be in this 950 acres. It's just under 1,000 acre area of our county. So like I said, we have the four hyperscalers, and then the big thing is we are not a freshwater cooling community. That was the first thing that Paige and I would say when someone would call. It's like, we don't have water to give you to cool. Even if we wanted to give them water, we don't even have enough capacity if we wanted to. We also don't want to give fresh water for cooling. We do have a recycled water reuse that Paige will talk about that the town is able to do, which is a really exciting project for the community. And then we're air cooled or closed loop. Air cooled, Bruce touched on, is just for those that don't know, it's kind of like your heat pump at your house. They blow cold air in, blow hot air out. Closed loop is kind of similar to like a radiator system where it's self-contained, but instead of bringing hot water to an area, it's bringing cold water to an area to cool it, and then the heat, leaving with the water. So it stays the same. It is liquid based. It's not necessarily only water. There's a chemical mix in there. But the Culpeper Tech Zone, we're looking at about 1,000 acres. We anticipate the capital investment to be $20 billion based on our economic impact study. We view that as the floor. If everything develops, we view that as the minimum. We did an extremely conservative study. For example, one example to show you how conservative it was, we did not have any servers being replaced for 15 years. And typically servers are replaced, 3 to 5 years, maybe up to 7. But we had servers staying in the tech zone for 15 years. We view that as extremely conservative study. The expected jobs is 2,000 indirect jobs, 9,000, or sorry, 2,000 direct jobs, 9,000 indirect jobs. We'll talk a little bit about that number. Some people view that a little bit high. I think it will include all campuses as well as vendors, most likely. But it is a little high, and we'll talk about. I do think data centers are a job creator. That is something I'm very passionate about, and we'll talk about it a little bit. And currently now in Culpeper, for the county, we require a conditional use permit for data centers outside of the tech zone. It's permitted inside, but outside you do need a conditional use permit. And I believe the town, Paige and Andrew, correct me, I believe you all in your new zoning ordinance does not allow it other than those two campuses, right?
Correct. And Andrew can speak to that more effectively. But yes, with the passing of the UDO, we've pretty much accepted where we are.
Yeah, the town created an overlay district that limited the geography within the town that would permit data centers.
So the big thing that I always try to tell people when we talk about Culpeper is there's like multiple ways you can approach data centers. Some people take the full cup and they are all in. For us, we're just looking at the teaspoon approach. We just need a little bit of it. We're happy. We got in, we got what we wanted, and we moved out. So let's do a little bit. How did we get here? This is a map of Virginia, and I have circled the town of Culpeper. By the way, thanks to everyone on this call. You're probably somewhere on this map. We did cut North Carolina a little bit, so sorry, Bruce. But as we zoom in, still there's a little red circle around the town of Culpeper. And then when you get in, this is where we are. And the tech zone, if you can see my mouse, is in this area just outside and a portion of town. And it looks like this when you look at a satellite image. That's mostly how Culpeper looks. Culpeper, outside of our development area, is as beautiful as the day it was created. We're 380 some odd square miles, and we like to keep it that way for the large part. And one strategy for that was doing the tech zone and telling data centers we only want you here, which was an exciting thing. I think a lot of times rural communities don't do a great job of saying what they want to be. We often wait for someone to come to us and then we tell them what we don't want to be, but we don't say like, go here. The tech zone gave us a chance to circle someplace on a map and say, let's talk in this area. So September 2021, we had two facilities. We had Swift and Equinix. You can see there, it's just under 700,000 square feet. And then over the course of about 3 years, and this next slide, I believe I have, is today, we saw the rest of the data center happen. Now we have this AWS facility, which was our first one, first new data center that came in April of 2022. That conversation, it's a 4-lane highway. It is rural. There's a quarry nearby. There's a lot of conversation that happened with it. It's a small facility. It's 430,000 square feet. But as we were learning about that rezoning, the board, after we got done, said, we want everything else to be well, like that process made sense here, but everything else needs to be in what we call town environs, which is the area in and around town. And that's where we started concentrating. We originally had 5 tech zones spread along US 29, which is a 4-lane divided US highway. We shrunk that down to one, and that's what we kept, these 950 acres. It does include a wastewater treatment plant. It does include a campus of our community college. They have a building here in Culpeper, and then it includes our technical education facility that our public schools operate. So there was a lot of good synergies for keeping it here, but it also just kind of limited our scope. The big reason why we wanted to limit that scope is we learned that data centers come with strings attached. that are very tall and very high powered. Um, we viewed having one zone for it was easier to mitigate the impacts than having multiple. We didn't really want to see trailblazing. So we already have a power corridor. Um, so the tech zone is in this square here, and this is where all the new, you can see the blow up. This is all the new substations. Already, this green line exists. So they're going to rebuild, they're going to upgrade this green line, and then they're going to add the red line right next to it. So we're going to have three 230 kilovolt lines coming into town environs, one coming out. And then once it gets in, it starts going to the various substations that it needs to service. And then we have a main power line that goes north-south through the center of our county. Again, for us, it made a lot more sense to concentrate it and try to mitigate those impacts in one area than saying, like, let's spread it out. The hard thing for us is we originally were trying to attract data centers like they were manufacturers, and we looked at the things that manufacturers needed and incentivized that, thought about that. For example, one of our tech zones was in a rural part of our county along the rail line because that's where manufacturers like to go, so that must make sense. And as we were realizing, that didn't work at all, so we eliminated that. We kept narrowing in. The impact of the tech zone, though, is pretty is already felt here in construction. We estimate that there will be 400 to 1,000 tradespeople per building on site. To give you some perspective, our largest private non-retail employer is under 400. So currently, one of our campuses just finished the steel skeleton. That parcel is our largest private employer today in the county. Those people are coming and getting gas, buying food. They're buying something for their partner on Friday on their way out of town. That's cash coming into our market. Also, 1,000 people can't leave the site for lunch every day. So we've worked with our food trucks to coordinate, their connections so they can get on site. One of our data centers is looking on how to launch, one of our developers is looking how to launch more food trucks. So they're looking on where they can donate so that we can have more small businesses be able to take advantage of this influx in people. Also, the electrical lines, those require linesman jobs that are hiring for our local workforce. And then the groundwork jobs, we have a couple quarries that's allowing them to come on site and work a little bit closer to home. We anticipate this construction will take probably 10 to 15 years all told. We might be a little bit ahead of that, but we're looking, at minimum 5, at maximum, 15 years of construction. Just in April, our technical education center had a signing day. 28 students signed with a data center construction company, a company that only does data center work. And from talking to those companies, if I had double that, if I had 56 students that wanted to apply, they would have hired 56 students. Those are 28 jobs that did not exist in Culpeper County 2 years ago. So it was those companies were the largest participants in our signing day, which was really exciting. When I talked about that employment, we anticipate somewhere between 20 to 50 jobs per building. That makes a little bit more sense. These are 24/7 facilities. They have everything from operators down to security guards and cleaning staff. And the other thing to keep in mind when people say they don't create jobs, these are about 100 acres, plus or minus, some a little bit larger, some a little bit smaller. But if we were to get a manufacturer on this site that had, 20 trucks coming in and out every day, and we said, hey, it's going to be 75 employees, that would be a great win for our community. We have to remember that they do create jobs. It's just they're building larger buildings and the job per square foot is much smaller. Also, the contractors are coming to the facility regularly and they will have full-time employment. So sometimes the employment figure is not anticipating that there are vendors that need to come into these clusters that are happening. I think that's really important to remember we are now seeing an influx in our industrial communication, new companies that want to come to Culpeper because they're just-in-time vendors for data centers, um, which is just it's all of it's really exciting and how we're seeing it come together. Our most expensive 2025 real estate assessments in the county, I have the top 9 there. 8 of them are data centers. The top 8 are all data center campuses. Me doing the math based off of our 2025 tax rate, the vacant DC land, paid about 1.2 million dollars. In total 1.9 million when you add the two operating. That AWS is a good example. That building was 35% complete, the first of 2 buildings, and it was assessed at 46 million. It'll be 113 million once that building's complete. And we're seeing some sales as developers are finalizing ownership. We'll probably see these assessments go up. But currently, we have about 700,000 square feet of space. We collect, in calendar year 2025, we collected 11.16, so 11.2 million in computer equipment taxes. If you were to take our real estate tax rate, it would take about 12 cents of real estate tax for us to recoup that 11 million without data centers. So it's an area that we need to talk about. It's an area that we have to keep in mind that this is it represents 0.4% of our entire county. Our economic impact study estimated that we'll collect over 100 million in the county. And I forget exactly what those town numbers were, but the county would keep $100 million in annual tax by calendar year 2030. That does not include the money the town would keep as well. So this is a benefit for both of our jurisdictions. We do have a tech zone incentive. That incentive is if they invest 10 million and they hire 10 employees, that we will return 40% of all taxes paid. So that'll be both real estate and computer equipment. But if they're not hiring, they're not getting the incentive, that was very important to us. We did not want to lower our tax rate as part of the incentive. We wanted to help them on the development. And then once the development happened, pay full freight moving forward. So the one thing, though, that we talk about with the Culpeper Tech Zone when we have meetings with our developers is we start with, we're looking to make Culpeper the world's best example of data center clustered in the world. The best example of cluster development in the world. And I don't know if we'll get there or not. But that's a good goal to have. And there's some exciting things that we've done specifically with the town that's kind of working towards getting us to be the best example of that.
All right, so I'll jump in, and Bruce touched on this earlier, Brian touched on it as well. And, kind of as we come to the end of our presentations here this afternoon, wanted to really talk about, again, what's unique to your community, what's unique to the properties that are being considered within your jurisdictions. And as you can see here again is the larger Culpeper Technology Zone, but then highlighted, focused for you are the acreage that falls within the town, representing both the Culpeper Technology Campus and Copper Ridge. And so this section here is under one ownership now with Stack Industries, or Stack Infrastructure, forgive me. And it got a little bit unique because the town has a light and power utility provider. And as Brian mentioned earlier, the town operates both water and wastewater for Culpeper. So from a utility perspective, not only did the town, but the body had some considerations to take into play. With this being in the town, we would have been the first light and power provider for these campuses. And if Brian, you go to the next slide, I want to talk about our electric service premise agreement. And the reason I want to touch on this is because what was really important to us when we were in discussions with our developer is finding a strategic operational balance between supporting economic development and investment in our community and also our responsibility to our existing customers. And so the power demands that these campuses were going to be requiring of the town light and power were simply they were exceeding what the town's operational design was. And so we spent years, and I don't really emphasize that enough, but years really looking at ways to find a path forward. As you can see on this slide, I have just a couple examples of, I mean, we spent a couple of days down in the basement at the State Corporation Commission, pulling up old maps from the early 1960s to truly understand, the different Virginia Electric Service territory maps and how accurate they were, and understanding what is just the right to serve versus actual territory and how that language impacts agreements moving forward. And so, after quite a bit of time here in discussions with both Dominion and then another provider, which is the Rappahannock Electric Cooperative provider, we were able to come to our electric service premise agreement. And what this did, it is established a long-term framework where Dominion will be serving these campuses direct. And we had to take a process to the body where the body gave the town manager the authority to release the right to serve. And I make that very specific to you because we did not release our territory. The town Light and Power, as a municipal electric supplier that is a part of VEMA, which is the Virginia Electric Municipal Authority, they did not release their territory. They did not give up their territory. We are simply releasing the right to serve a utility client that is demanding greater than 5 megawatts. And so the body actually passed that back in March of 2023. And then we were able to come to agreement between the town of Culpeper, Dominion Energy, Stack Infrastructure, and behind the scenes also Rappahannock Electric Co-op. And we completed the electric service premise agreement just this past year in the fall of 2025. And so Brian had a slide earlier that showed where those substations were coming in and discussed how there will be a line upgrade to more than one 230 kV line to bring that power in. And this really was important to the town because our first and foremost priorities are protecting the interests of our taxpayers. And so we wanted to make sure that this agreement really was going to be able to ensure reliable and resilient delivery to our existing customer base. It also recognized that the scale for the demand for these campuses were more than our municipal distribution system was originally designed to serve. And so this gave joint protection to both the end user, Stack, and the town. And I think it's a really wonderful example of taking time and really assessing not just that immediate need and that immediate gain, but assessing that long-term sustainability for how we can recognize who is the right partner when it comes to utilities to make sure that these campuses are safe for our environment and for operators. Another major agreement that the town entered into with Stack Infrastructure was our water services agreement. And this one I think is a little bit even more unique. And so as you can see within the Culpeper Technology Zone is the town water treatment plant. And then you can see that little yellow dot, which is ultimately where our reclaimed water tank tower is going to go. And this agreement really also ensured that growth is paying for growth. So Stack Infrastructure through the town in this agreement will be providing all the capital to build out this system. And this system will first serve the Culpeper Technology Campus and the Copper Ridge Campus. And in a moment, when we go back to the bigger map, you'll see where Stack has additional footprints within this Culpeper Technology Zone on the county side. And as capacity is available, the reclaimed water might be able to be extended to some of those secondary sites as well. And we are currently working on how we can make that happen, including additional pump stations and additional piping. So, what I love about this is that instead of us looking at Stack and the data centers as simply a reclaimed water client, I kind of look at it as we got to unlock our wastewater treatment capacity. And so, by the data centers coming in and seeking this environmentally friendly approach to cooling technology and to putting the capital investment into building out the infrastructure to be able to actually accomplish that, what they're ultimately doing is now that we're going to have a portion and a very lion's share portion of the Culpeper wastewater affluent going to this cooling, it's actually increasing our capacity. So it's going to be able to support future development and non-data center development. This additional capacity can really speak to whether it's residential growth, whether it's commercial growth, whether it's educational growth. This existing or this expanding capacity is going to be able to serve industries that are not directly related to data centers and going to be able to ensure long-term improvements to the town and county's water and wastewater treatment and our ability to serve all of our community, not just one sector of our community. And so with Brian's map up here, we don't have cardinal directions, but actually it kind of works in our favor. So north is at the top of the map, south is down at Data Bank. And as you can see, where stack infrastructure is up there on the northern end, with capacity under the WSA, if we're able to, we will pump additional reclaimed water out to that site to be able to serve cooling technologies at that location as well. And we're just really proud of both of these agreements because they really epitomize how do you protect the town's responsibilities to our taxpayer and to our community while also being able to support, as Brian touched on, one of the largest fiscal investments that Culpeper has seen in our history, and a major job supplier as well. And we were able to get there by working with a really great developer and by asking tough questions and taking our time to ensure that both parties were winning, all parties, including the end user, were winning with these agreements in hand. And so I love Brian's goal. I love that the town gets to be part of Brian's goal of being able to showcase how cluster development can be approached. And we can also confidently say, thank you, we've reached our capacity. We are where we are. We like having you as a part of our community. We understand the greater impacts, all of that indirect and induced trade dollars that are circulating through our local economy and what that's going to do. It doesn't even touch on the fact that we had existing people living in Culpeper that were commuting to this industry outside of Culpeper that are now going to be able to not just live in Culpeper, but work in Culpeper. So it's going to improve lives of our local residents as well that have previously been, traveling hour plus commute times to Northern Virginia and be able to now take those positions here locally. So, it's going to be really, I think the case study is early days, right? We have a lot of time in front of us as construction's moving. We've got a lot of land moving. We've got, some structures in the air. But as we actually see these become operational and watch them settle into those new patterns, both from workforce and from fiscal impact, I think this is going to be a really great overall story that Culpeper can be proud of. And I know that my part was short, but I know that there's questions probably filtering in, Andrew.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, and again, I think this is a planning hosted webinar, but I wanted to bring in the economic development perspective because when these decisions are being made in communities, that economic development aspect is often a critical component of it. So we do have a couple of questions. Bruce has been doing a great job of answering those that are in the Q&A. We've got a couple in the chat as well that I'm going to pose to various folks. Bruce, I'm actually going to turn the first one to you because we had a question as to what is the makeup of your data center subcommittee?
Yeah, so right now it is it's 4 individuals made up of men and women. About half of them are retirees. We have a couple people who actually work for the state themselves in some type of environmental capacity. Many of them have actually been on our environmental advisory board since its inception, so it's about 6 or 7 years, and they've been involved in multiple environmental initiatives that the town has done so far. We've adopted more of a dark skies ordinance and things like that, and so these are key members of that group that have helped us kind of shape other environmentally important aspects of our town that are now serving on this committee as well. So they do have a wealth of knowledge. They know more about trees than I could probably ever hope to know about and other things like that. But Apex has a lot of really active people that are looking to contribute. But so yeah, it's 2 men, 2 women. They're all above the age of 40 at this time. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Brian, I'm going to direct the next one to you. Aside from data centers, what other industries are located in the tech zone? I can only think of two properties off the top of my head that are not data center planned, but I'll defer to you on that one.
Um, there, I'm trying to think, looking at our map.
Public utilities and higher education.
Yeah,
Yeah,
those
I
are the
was
two.
saying,
The Germanna
I was,
Community College System Daniel
yeah.
Technology Center is located within the technology zone. The High School Career Technical Education Center with Culpeper County Public Schools sits adjacent to the Daniel Technology Center with higher education. And then the town's water and wastewater treatment plant, as a public utility, environmental services operates within the technology zone.
Yeah,
There's one
that's
tiny
all.
parcel that is owned that is not spoken to, that is just, unimproved land, but we're talking less than 10 acres that are left.
Well, and we have another on the next to data bank, but that one proffered out data centers in there. So that would be it.
Yep.
Um, Paige, this one's probably going to go to you, I think, with the most background on it. Her question was that seems to have done extensive research about the potential impacts and regulatory needs in addition to potential economic benefits. What studies or research about data center impacts did Culpeper do prior to incentivizing their development?
We, well, and Brian and I can answer this combined. So as Brian mentioned, in 2008, the county kind of took a position, which actually predates both Brian and I, took a position of that interest with those early days of Equinix coming in. And then from there, there were a lot of early inquiries in the early teens, if you will. I joined Culpeper in 2015. And most of the inquiries that were reaching the town and the county at that time came with a very big ask, came with that massive freshwater cooling ask, came with a massive ask for town and county provided resources that both bodies and staff were not comfortable with saying yes to. And we were very comfortable with that no, as Brian mentioned. We were comfortable with saying we are not in the business, we don't have it, but even if we did have it, we're not in the business of being able to provide freshwater cooling. And so most of those early days inquiries kind of moved on. There was also a number of years in there where the majority of the land that is currently the Culpeper Technology Zone were owned by entities that sometimes had two or three, upwards of five entities as a single ownership. And so price per acre and land conversion was not as direct at that time. As we reached the end of the teens and entered into the 2020s, land started to become more agreeable. So our previous landowners in this zone started to get to a yes a lot faster. And as land converted, the questions were still there. What are the resources? And so, as Bruce touched on this earlier, this is a all hands on deck for a community when working with a data center. This is environmental services, this is public works, this is planning, economic development, senior leadership. And there were a lot of conversations between staff and ultimately the body where necessary. But we did not actually pause. In Virginia, if I understand correctly, moratoriums are actually illegal in Virginia, I believe, under state code. So instead of really kind of drawing a line and saying, not yet, we went slow. We went very, very slow. We allowed our existing regulatory process and due process from everything from rezoning applications and working with planning commissions to ultimately body decisions. We allowed those processes to live live and to do extra meetings. I mean, Andrew and Brian, the amount of extra meetings we've done in our community to try to ensure that that communication is there with our residents. Is there always opportunities to do more? Sure. But we allowed our existing regulatory processes to be our learning period and to seek out answers that we didn't feel like we had the in-house expertise to answer on our own. And we had those discussions in open meetings as often as possible. So We asked the hard questions. We brought the developers in. We brought third-party experts in. We contracted people that were not in business with data centers to talk about everything from noise to impact. And so we didn't do what Apex did, but we did it in concurrent to the interest and in the investment that was actively coming in. Because as I said, in the early 20s, those lands were being sold. So, we're not in the business at the staff level to be able to prevent property exchanging hands. So we had to learn as it came to our community, and we've definitely learned a lot. Brian, sorry, I kind of lectured there.
No, you're good, and that's some of it. Half of our tech zone, just looking at the map, was rezoned, prior to, was in the 2018s for data center development. And some of the strategies we used back then, for example, allowing or encouraging wells for cooling, we we had to work with the companies to be like, we really don't want you to do that now. Learning and understanding. And they kind of voluntarily moved off of some of the permissions that were granted earlier prior to the growth of the tech zone.
I want to take a step back and sort of look at a bigger picture question here from Michelle, which was, she said, similar to Sarah's question, when and in what process did the tech zone become an initiative for the town and county of Culpeper? Was it part of a comprehensive plan or a small area plan process? What did community engagement look like during that time? And that's where I want to make one of the clear distinctions. The technology zone is actually not a part of our zoning ordinance. It's not a land use measure, it's a taxation measure. And so with that comment, I'll turn it to Paige and Brian just to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'll say for the county, it was 2008, so that was prior to me. In 2023, I believe it was December 2020 or November 2023 when we shrunk down the tech zone to one. We did tie some zoning aspects go to the tech zone. So, for example, there's greater height that's permissive in the tech zone, but not outside of the tech zone for industry. And that is part of our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan for many additions showed this area being industrial in nature. So it had been part of the comp plan. And I think some of these parcels, when they came up for rezoning back as zoning was going very far back to, was when zoning was being implemented, that they viewed this area to be industrial in nature. So it is tied to the comp plan. In our comp plan, we did a revision in 2023, or an update to the comp plan in 2023, I should say, a regularly scheduled update, and that included a ton of community engagement in as part of that, and we definitely kept that contained to where you see it today, which borders a four-lane highway as well.
And on the town side, we took a report and recommendation to the body in November of 2022 to consider expanding the county's tech zone, again, from Andrew's comments, as not a land use zoning, but more of a taxation zoning. We expanded the tech zone to mirror what the county was doing. We took that first to the body at a committee level in November of 2022. It went in front of the full body for approval in December of 2022. And shortly after that, as Brian just mentioned, the county actually reduced. Back in 2008, they had multiple tech zones. And as interest was increasing and private landowners were selling their land under their property rights, that they get to do that. As that interest was increasing in our community, the county then reduced their tech zones to create this cluster impact and ensure that it was not only in line with their comp plan, but also the town's. Future land use plan. The town also has an annual execution of our comprehensive management plan called the Culpeper 2030 plan. Previously, it was the Culpeper 2020. Once a year, we update that and take that to the body every January at a council retreat where all of the sectors and all of the corridors of the town are kind of discussed and outlined and presented in a way of where does the town see those corridors within our community moving forward in the future. And so it had been supported for a number of years for that corner of the town that's in the tech zone to be for major employers. It wasn't just industrial, it was really major employers. And as Brian spoke to earlier, at the end of the day, these will be our major employers here in Culpeper. So it aligns very closely with what that future land use and those annual iterations of our comp plan we're calling for.
Well, and just to build on that from the planning perspective, we have not updated our comp plan since prior to the adoption of that technology zone, which did represent a transition in the viewpoint of the board as far or the town council as far as what the desired use of that was. Our comp plan for that area did show it as mixed use development in the future previously. But with the adoption of the technology zone over that, they gave a clear indication of a shift of their perspective in terms of the desired land use there. In Virginia, we often work in cycles of comp plan update and then zoning updates to reflect that. We happen to be in the zoning update cycle. And so, as mentioned earlier, when we went through that update of our zoning ordinance within the town, we formally identified this area as our with our data center overlay that we mentioned earlier. And so identifying this as the only portion of the town where data centers would be contemplated. Previously, the ordinance allowed the data centers by right under the zoning. It was very, very nebulous, very vague. Again, now they require the conditional use permit if we were to have any. Again, because of the build out of the existing projects, there's no other land. So more of that conditional use permit would be in place if they ever chose to try and expand those existing sites for development. Brian, our next question is posed to you, and it's related to the tax revenues that the county and I guess the town have realized from data center development. And just wondering if either jurisdiction has earmarked that revenue for specific benefits or services to the respective communities.
Not at this time. That's something that we have talked about of what does that look like as these start ramping up dramatically. We are a community that has grown at 10% every decade since the 1960s. I like to remind people of that. That wasn't a big deal when we were 20,000 people and you added 2,000. At the last census, we were what, 52,000, I think it was, 54,000, like that. It's a big deal now how many people we've been adding, and there's infrastructure that needs to catch up. The county's looking at a courthouse that we all work on. We've worked on that project because the current courthouse is located downtown. We have a jail facility that we need to look at, where we have offices that are expanded, but yeah, the building has not. We just opened a community pool. There's a lot of needs that are coming down the pike that we know. So obviously revenue will go towards finally realizing those projects. But that's something that Henrico County specifically, they took, priority in their community was for housing. So they set up a housing fund utilizing their data center revenue. So that's something that I think communities should think about, especially as they get large, like, hey, should we break this down and see what goes where, or how we look at it moving forward.
On the town side, I will not mirror, but I will add to what Brian said. Those discussions are active. Obviously, those are discussions mainly with the body. That's not a staff level discussion. Recommendations, of course, best practices and examples, but at least me, whether all the other staff join me in it, I like to always counsel, it's not real until it's real. So, we work with Mangum Economics, a very well-respected industry economic impact forecasting firm, to really be able to take submitted site plans and square footage and expectations and industry standards for server turnover and employment and everything and try to get as close to what we can believe is an economic forecast. But that's all it is. It's a forecast. We're not there yet. And so and let's also keep in mind that jurisdictions also, bill their taxes separately. Another unique component of Culpeper, to add to our uniqueness, is that The county does a prorated tax billing cycle, whereas the town, if it's there on January 1st, then it gets billed for that year. So sending out the tax bill, collecting the taxes retained, going through, are they eligible for the incentive and the reimbursement? Looking at an additional level here in the town and the county, we have a revenue share agreement together. So there are extra components that we have yet to experience. We haven't actually gone through that process yet. They're not actually generating operating outside of Equinix and Swift in the county side. On the town side, we haven't experienced it yet. So we're not assigning those dollars until they're actually real dollars.
Yeah, to piggyback off the piggyback, we build our budget off of the previous year's tax revenue. So it that means when they first pay that revenue, we don't really project that in the building of the budget. So that would be extra tax revenue that we would collect in that year, and then it would be funneled into the next fiscal year.
Paige, we had one more question about the ESP agreement. I think that if you could just talk again about that briefly, but I think it's a little bit more specific to the locality and the situation. This is in the Q&A
Okay.
session, just asking if we could share the ESP agreement, and it's one
Agreement.
that's going to be
Oh,
unique. Um,
Janice, if you would like to send me your email or if somebody can capture that, I would be happy to share the electric service premise agreement with you. It is a public document, of course. So, yes, it outlines the basically division of responsibilities and between those parties for not just wholesale, but also distribution. And if you want to do a deep dive on it, I'm happy to go into it offline. I mean, the number of iterations that we took to get to where we were when we finally executed that agreement, uh, it was a lot. State Corporation Commission, multiple utility providers, territory maps, power demand and load. Do they need to be wholesale up to the point of demarcation to then the remaining feet to the building connection? And who's going to be the distribution partner? How are those rate classes going to be determined? How does that impact the rate class from a wholesale down to a distributor? So there were a lot of complexities and layers that had to go into that. A lot more than we can probably get to here at this moment, but happy to have those conversations further with you for sure. And I can email you the agreement.
I think it's gone now, but
Okay.
Valerie had asked a question just about Culpeper and sort of the studies that have been done here and if they're available. I don't know that we've produced sort of a white paper in a similar manner to Bruce described for Apex. We've lent heavily on the experiences of others. We've tracked and had conversations with colleagues in Prince William, in Loudoun, looked at sort of things like Prince William's recent noise ordinance that's geared specifically to data center noise. We've looked at the JLARC, the Virginia General Assembly Judicial Committee, essentially had produced a report on data centers and best practices. And we've looked to incorporate a lot of those in terms of the review of projects that we're working, the two projects that we're working on for the town at least. Brian, I'm not sure to what extent you can speak to the development
I mean,
side, sort of the land use side
it's
for the county.
Yeah, it's the same of one looking at what issues. I think that was a good learning experience. What issues that we saw from our neighbors to the north who have dealt with it a little bit longer. One of the difficulties, though, that I always try to make sure people realize is how they developed uh, Data Center Alley, how they developed Prince William is not necessarily how data centers are developing today. Those are more onesie, twosie buildings where there might be 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts, 20 megawatts. New facilities are 72 megawatts and they're campus style, and they're separated off. They're not, so you have to learn, that was a big learning curve. It's like, okay, well, why did they put that? We've all seen that picture of the data center right next to the residential development. How did that happen? Where did that happen? For us in the county, made sense with an area designed for industry along a highway. that made a lot of sense. Now let's talk about how can we mitigate that, mitigate whatever impacts that might be, and then try to go backwards from there. But yes, we spent a lot of time calling up north to see what they've learned, what they thought, and then try to work the best we can here in the county.
And again, I mean, I think what we've said all along here is every community needs to look at this based on their own criteria, based on their own situation. Tyler shared in the chat here that Frederick County is looking to amend their zoning ordinance to prohibit data centers based on the community feedback there, and that certainly would be permitted in Virginia, whereas that moratorium has legal questions about it as to whether it could do it. Todd describing Fluvanna having a special use permit within the industrial zones to permit it. So again, we wanted to just take this opportunity to share two different approaches that have been taken by communities, one in North Carolina, one in Virginia, as it relates to data centers, share some of the lessons learned, share our experiences. Hopefully you found it beneficial, and we greatly appreciate you joining us today. I don't think we have any more outstanding questions. And so, Jillian, I will turn it back over to you to just to wrap us up here. But before I do that, I do want to just thank one more time Bruce, Paige, and Brian for joining us today and sharing their perspectives. Really do appreciate it. And with that, Jillian, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Paige, Bruce, and Brian, for sharing your experiences and lessons learned. Just second everything that Andrew has said. And of course, thank yous are pouring in the chat box. And thank you to our attendees for asking questions. Just a couple of quick logistical items. Keep your eyes peeled on your inboxes. We'll be sending out the follow-up correspondence that will include the link to the recording and the slide decks. So you'll have those resources. And I think August 13th, I could be wrong, is the next time that MAPC will present a webinar in its series. So stay tuned for more information there. And again, today is the last day to lock in those early bird tickets to attend the APA Virginia conference in Danville this month. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.